Hi, class. All right, we are moving on here, and we are going to be um, looking at chapter 8 now. And this chapter really focuses on um, guidance issues. So, alternate ways of thinking about how we help guide children rather than um, using punishment. Okay. So, when we first just look at the two different words, uh, guidance and discipline, we're kind of comparing those two. Some of the associations that have come along with guidance is when I just did a quick Google search of images, this is what popped up. So advice, support, right? Assistance, tips, right? Those are all, when we think about those kinds of words, we think about like friendly, positive, helpful, right? It sounds very supportive in nature. The images that came up with this search were things like this image where both people are on the same level, right? They're both sitting. The child is clearly seeking comfort from the adults. They're embracing in a positive, loving manner. And the parent or the adult figure is, reciprocating that child's need. So that's what comes up with associations around the word guidance. Now let's compare that to discipline. So discipline is typically considered training to obey rules. Punishment is used to correct disobedience. So this was a quote that came up with discipline. Suffer the pain of discipline or suffer the pain of regret. Yikes, right? Calm down. Why so harsh? Images that came up with discipline, you can see the difference in these experiences that this child is having. It's not the same child necessarily, but this young child, she's not making eye contact. She's looking down and away from the adult. Her arms are crossed. She's almost like kind of curling into herself, like withdrawing into herself. And then the adult is at a different level, so above her, coming down. So there's kind of a visual power or hierarchy difference that we can see. And there's no contact, right? There's no contact. And if you think, and if I think back to moments where I've guided somebody or my children, or if I've been in more of a mode to discipline them, this is exactly what happens, right? I'm either trying to be an authoritarian and really tell them how it is, or I'm embracing them, helping them. So in thinking of these two differences, obviously we can see which one probably is more positive of an experience, not only for the adult, but for the child for sure. And so let's just continue on thinking about how we can offer more guidance, because guidance is what helps children to self-regulate. And this is really important because self-regulation is what children need, and that skill that children need to have positive social interactions. If a child can find their ability to self-regulate sooner, they will have more positive interactions and need overall less discipline or less. I mean, I don't know that children need discipline at all, but even those moments won't even present themselves. So how do we help children cope, essentially? And we're going to watch a short video, and then we're going to use the video to kind of talk through some of the different points.
Self-regulation is an important skill for your child. Children are ready to learn when they are calm and focused. So it's important to help children learn to adjust their emotions and behaviors to cope with changing situations in a positive way. Self-regulation is being the boss of your behavior, emotions, and attention. It develops when caring adults respond sensitively to a child.
Self-regulation is the ability within ourselves to moderate or modulate our system so that we don't go to extremes. When our system goes to an extreme, it's hard to function. If we feel very anxious, it's hard to pay attention to what's going on and to function. If we feel very angry, even if we feel very happy, it's hard to pay attention to what's going on because we're caught up in that. So in order to do a lot of functioning, we have to be able to regulate.
Parents can help their toddler observe their surroundings, listen, understand consequences, use words and actions to explain their needs, and problem solve. This will teach the toddler to deal with obstacles in life. It will also keep the toddler in the calm and alert state that is so important to learning. Oh, that's so cute. As a parent, it's important to keep yourself in a calm state too. When you are with your child, minimize distractions such as texting and television. Focus your attention on your child.
Do you want to hear the story, Nicolo? Do you want to sit in my lap and hear the rest of the story?
Technology is a big part of all of our lives. The issue for parents is not to be captured by technology to the extent that they're not sensitive to what's going on with their children. Interactions on the internet or through technology can be important parts of our lives. But if they intrude into our engagement with our children, if we can't forget about those things when we're engaged with our children, we're shortchanging our kids. We're actually shortchanging ourselves too, because there's tremendous pleasure and satisfaction in being engaged with your baby and with your young children.
Try to be positive in stressful situations. Learn to identify the things that make you feel stressed. This will teach your baby to cope with emotions. Your baby will learn from your behavior. Try to set a good example.
Okay, you hold this and you're going to make your color blue, okay? Okay, hold the blue please for mom.
I want to have that blue.
And you hold the yellow. Okay, ready? We're going to make
Use positive disciplining techniques. Learn to understand your child's temperament, needs, and skills. Set clear expectations that are appropriate for the age of your child. Use distractions, provide choices, and help your child solve problems. Avoid yelling, threatening, hitting, and spanking. These are known to damage the brain. They will also raise your child's stress level and prevent learning. Never physically hurt your child. Hitting, pinching, or spanking your child will also teach him that it's okay to do the same to others. Let's watch a scenario.
Hello.
Oh, hi.
Hi. Are you Cameron?
What's eating?
What's that?
What is eating?
She's eating a strawberry.
What? The way you go to my house.
Yeah, we're in your house.
No. Not only my house.
You don't want us to come in your house?
Then go home, okay?
What do you think about that?
I know you have to stop from here.
Do you want to check out some of these toys? You made all your strawberry roller punch?
Oh no, my baby, no. We're going to see right now. Oh no.
What are you guys playing with? Can we play with you?
No.
No? Do you have another toy that Annabelle could play with?
Don't play with me. Yes, you can play with me.
So Annabelle, they're taking little balls and putting them in a jar.
Would you like to help? Here's what Mommy would like. I would really like you to play nicely with Annabelle and share the balls. Let's give Annabelle a couple balls for her to put in now, okay?
Oh, this is Annabelle. You can give the balls to her. Can you give some to
Give
Annabelle?
it to Annabelle.
Don't touch them.
Shawnee, Bonnie. Shawnee, not nice, honey. We're going to share all our stuff, okay?
How this one's work?
Yeah, we're going to share it and play all together.
So that's in a lot of ways a very typical setup for kids, right? They don't always want to share right at the start.
No.
But what's interesting is the way this mom dealt with that. Both moms dealt with it really in a very sensitive way. So first the mom soothed her own daughter, Annabelle, in a nice way, sometimes with words.
What do you think about that?
I know you're stuck for you.
Do you want to get some of these toys?
But she was also able to engage the other child without making her feel bad about what she was doing.
Can we play with you?
It's normal at that age to say, go home, you can't play with my toys. But she does have to learn how to share. It's an important part of growing up. And she was teaching her that, and her own mom was also teaching her that when she came in.
With Annabelle and share the balls. Let's give Annabelle a couple balls for her to put in now.
So they were giving them important lessons about I'm paying attention to what you're feeling and what you're thinking and what you want, but I'm also teaching you important things that you have to learn.
Okay, so let's focus on a few things that we saw in that video and how the children were helped by the adults to self-regulate a little bit more. So like was mentioned in the video, children cannot have beneficial social interactions when in extreme states. And they sort of created a setup there to put a child in an extreme state where there was a new child and a new parent coming in to their home to play that they weren't aware of. So the extreme states can be extreme, sadness, anger, anxiety. Those are normal feelings that we would associate with potential dysregulation, but also extreme happiness too, right? If somebody's so worked up and so excited, they can almost be overstimulating or overwhelming to other people around them. In the video though, we saw a child that probably was feeling potentially a little bit angry. Why is somebody coming into my house that I don't know? Anxious about that even. And we saw that it was hard for that child to cope with that they were starting to feel dysregulated. And so out of that dysregulation, we heard from that child, no to sharing, no to being here, go home, no to all of it, which is normal, right? Just like we heard in the video. Once the mother, though, came in, so the mother of that dysregulated child, she was really able to frame for the child that this situation is safe. She guided the child into how to respond to the new child, Annabelle, and the mother that were in the room. And very quickly, we saw that that child was able to regulate and then start sharing her toys. So, not 10 seconds before, the child can't share, can't do anything with that child, is having a hard time engaging because of the anxiety. But as soon as mom comes in and offers a few gentle reminders, now the child can share. I think that was a great example of guidance. If we tweak the scenario in our minds and think, what if that parent had come in to that moment and started yelling at their child for not sharing their toys? How can you be like that? Why aren't you sharing? I've taught you better. How disorienting for that child, how confusing. So you've got an already anxious child that's now being told, that they are being mean, that they aren't living up to expectations, right? And so this is where then a child would spiral out of control and be further dysregulated, which then just makes the whole situation harder to deal with, not only for the child, but for the parent, for the other children and people around. It can make the situation much more difficult to cope with. And so we saw a great example of guidance, though, in that. And what guidance did was it allowed that child to focus in on the situation and pay attention to the parent so that they can then go on to have an appropriate social interaction with this new child and parent. It also helps children learn about their feelings. So what I really liked about this interaction was that Annabelle's mom was sensing that there was some tension between the children, but instead of saying, hey, you're not being nice to my kid, or, you know, come on, Annabelle, let's get out of here. These kids aren't being very, very nice. She just said, what do you think about that? And that's such a great question, because it allows that child to, even though that Annabelle was probably too young to have a lot of verbal skills to respond, she's able to think, how do I feel about this situation, right? Self-reflection. That's really important, and that's an important step for self-regulating. So it's a nice approach. The mother isn't being judgmental. She's just offering a thoughtful question. And that's really, really helpful in keeping the mood and the emotions calm, right? Which is what helps keep people self-regulated. Lastly, our book also talks about experiencing consequences. There is a page, I want to say page 186, I believe. Yep. That talks about different types of consequences. And consequences are not necessarily always discipline-based. There's different types of consequences. Some are created by an adult. They're related to a child's action, but they're reasonable. They are appropriate when it comes to what the child did. It's on the same level. So let's say you've got a child that's made a mess. A natural or a logical consequence of that would be, if you make a mess in this house, you have to help clean it up, right? And then you model for them starting to clean up, you encourage them to help, and that teaches children to clean up after themselves. If a child makes a mess and you take away video games for 3 weeks, how does that relate, right? So they need to be reasonable. They need to be age appropriate too. If you allow a toddler to carry a full glass of water and they spill it and you get angry at them, that's not reasonable, because nobody should expect that a toddler can carry a full glass of water without spilling it. It's not physically or developmentally possible. So keeping that in mind. There's also something called natural consequences. And natural consequences are great because a child makes a choice and then something just follows that teaches them. And so one that I tried in our house, I'm not sure that it was helpful, but my youngest daughter did not want to wear a jacket in last winter, like refused completely, would just rip it off her body. It was becoming such a power struggle that I was like, fine, don't wear a jacket. In my mind, I'm thinking she'll get cold enough and then it will, she'll tell me she needs a jacket, right? So I took it with us. Now, you would think that would have happened at some point. I mean, there were times where she literally had goosebumps all over her arms and she was shaking, but she would still tell me that she was not cold. So I'm probably in for it later, because she's got maybe a little bit of a stubborn streak. But ultimately, I let her just have the consequence. It's not like we lived outside in a tent. I mean, we aren't out in the elements and in the weather a lot. So she was always healthy and safe and protected for the most part. But I allowed her to experience that. And she actually never asked for a jacket. But you know what? It took away the power struggle. And I thought, if she's willing to be that cold, I'm willing to not care, ultimately. And I think that that's really sometimes what it boils down to is us as adults just have to say, this isn't worth it. This is not worth a fight every morning. And some children would learn that if they have goosebumps and they're shivering, that they should just put a jacket on. We'll see how this winter goes. We'll see if she's learned. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the beginnings of self-regulation. This really begins when adults are interacting with newborns. It happens very early, and it's how adults are interacting and how children learn to respond to that interaction. The best way to help children learn how to start to self-regulate is really by us adults following the cues of that baby. Many times we respond sort of seeking what we want out of the interaction rather than what the child's ready for. So let's hear a little bit from Magda. She is kind of a child development guru, if you will. Let's listen to what she says about adult-infant interactions, and then we'll talk about it.
How do you feel the very young infant should be cared for? Let's starting with the 1-month-old, 2-month-old.
Well, it really depends a great deal on what we feel this infant needs. Obviously, we all try to meet the needs. And from my point of view and my observations, this is, of course, a transitory time when they just came out. And the way I perceive it is that no matter how simple an environment is, a baby is overwhelmed by too much stimuli. Because if you try to imagine that everything they see, they hear, they feel, they touch is new. So we are already accustomed to all kinds of things. We know them, they don't. So to adapt to all that newness, to adapt to their inner physiological needs, which are plenty, nothing functions smoothly yet. Digestive system, respiratory system, it's not yet oiled. And so this baby is busy being a very young baby. I think that's the agenda.
For the baby?
For the baby.
What's the agenda for the caregiver? Or
to make
the carer?
I think, to make it as smooth, as easy as possible.
How would the person go about doing that?
To make it less loud, less bright, less, to allow the child to learn kind of step by step. So he's not bombarded, because I think that if you have to adapt to too much, you may give up or you may become overexcited. But if you get it slowly, then you learn.
Okay, so if you caught that right at the end, I think that really is a telling part of self-regulation, and not only for really infants, but for young children as well, is especially in the infant stage, like we were talking about, every sensation is new. So, and they don't have control, right? They're feeling hunger pains for the first time. They're feeling other digestive feelings during that time. Their respiratory rate, if you notice brand new babies, it's a little bit sporadic. It's not as even and smooth. Their arms, right? They have no control. They jerk around. They sometimes hit themselves in the face. They don't have the fluidity that we have, and that's from the hemispheres of the brain crossing signals. That hasn't happened initially. And so all of this requires slowness and in calm environments, peace and quiet, unlike here at my house, if you can hear my children in the background. Infants need that in order to just get used to what's happening inside of them. But a lot of times as adults, we try to get their attention. Oh, baby, look over here, look over there. And we really kind of disrupt the process of them trying to just regulate what's happening with them. The same though goes for older children, preschool age, especially if we think back to that scenario that we were just looking at and watching, where that child felt dysregulated when a new child and parent came into the room. The mom's approach to help guide that child was very slow, was just calm, even toned. But if she'd come in loud and boisterous and demanding and angry sounding, it would have completely changed that dynamic. So I think we always need to be more aware of self-regulation, that children are always working on that, and that we have to set that pace for them. Other ways we try to self-regulate ourselves is through the environment. So we need to think of the environmental considerations. This first example, this is also my youngest daughter, again. She, around this age, so she was probably, 18 months or so. And she really loved this cabinet in her house. And initially, this cabinet had other things in it. But what I found was, as we've learned about toddlers in previous lecture, is that they are doers and they are explorers. They are not producers. And she just wanted to take everything out of the cabinet all the time. And so I finally thought I need to create an environment that's appropriate for her. She wants to be in the kitchen with me here. So I'm going to help make this a smoother thing rather than her always cleaning up after me. I'm going to clean out this cabinet, and I'm going to let it be hers. Now, some of you might be thinking, appropriate. This is under the kitchen sink, and there's plumbing, and there's the inner workings of a garbage disposal. This is true. Everything turned out fine. I'm not saying it was the most appropriate cabinet, but nonetheless, it was what she chose that she wanted to be in there. And so no harm, no foul, everything was fine. She was never hurt. Maybe a completely empty cabinet would have been better. But nonetheless, we let this be her space. She would put her toys in there. She would steal her sister's shoes and hide them in there. It became like, we jokingly called it her room, because she didn't have her own room. She had to share a room with her brother. And so I think a lot of times we worry that, or we get frustrated over what our children are doing, but we haven't set up an environment in which they can just be themselves at the developmental level that they are. And so this is just one example of offering that to a child. There's other ways, like not having things in reach of the child that you don't want them to reach. Some of these things are very simple, but a lot of times as adults, we put expectations on our children to act older than they are, or we make them feel badly that, that they're making a mess or that they're opening things up, but that's just the state that they're in. And so us as adults need to prepare for that and create an appropriate environment in which they don't have access to things we don't want them to have access to. We shouldn't be upset with them for that. Another environmental consideration is letting the environment provide the limits. And I've got a couple examples here of this. This first one of the traffic patterns, this is something that is set up in our life as adults that we don't even really think about. I was kind of surprised by this example, but it makes perfect sense. When you think about traveling on a freeway, you don't notice as you're traveling in a certain direction that there's an on-ramp, right? Sometimes there'll be a sign because people will be merging. But the on-ramps are meant to not really be that visible because they don't want people to go off of an on-ramp, right? Because that can cause an accident and be unsafe. So they have created an environment that helps provide limits for us as drivers. And that's, again, what we can do for children too, is provide an appropriate environment that limits what they can get into, what might not be safe. If they are door unlockers, then you have locks that are higher, right? Or you have an alarm system or all these other things that can help provide the limit to the environment. An example in my own life is I never keep soda in the refrigerator. I know that that is a bizarre example, but I choose not to buy soda that I really like to drink because I know I'll drink it. And so that keeps it out of our house. So that's a limit I've set for myself. But my husband, he tells me he needs a Pepsi every day. He has to have one Pepsi every day at lunch. The problem is if we keep the Pepsi in the fridge, it doesn't matter if it's not my favorite soda. If there is an ice cold soda in the fridge, I will drink it. Opening up the can, the little fizzy that comes out, holding a cold can, especially on a summer day, like all of that sensory experience, I just cannot resist. And so in order to provide an environmental limit on myself so that I won't drink soda more than I should, or that I have a should that I've put on myself, I keep it in the garage. My husband grabs it as he leaves for work. He sticks it in his lunchbox. It has time to get cold from the ice that's in his lunchbox. And he's able to enjoy his soda at lunch. And I'm able to not drink it all. So it works out. So there's ways that we can put limits in our own life. And we as adults need them too. But there's ways to be creative with our environment so that we put limits on children too, so that we keep them safe and that are developmentally appropriate. But the environment is also keeping them regulated, right? If we always have an environment set up that we are struggling with our children in, or that creates a power struggle each day, then we need to rethink the environment and make it more appropriate. Your book has a lot of different examples of others that are not specific always to the environment, but ways of working with young children. So I'm going to go through those quickly. Redirecting energy. If you notice that your child has a lot of energy, it's time for them to go outside, right? They shouldn't be climbing the walls. They should be climbing trees or playing at a park, something like that. So giving them ways to redirect their energy more appropriately. Providing physical control. This is really important for that younger age. Before they have a lot of verbal skills, we see a lot of physical aggression come out in those kids. And so sometimes they literally need the adult not to say something to them, but to go over and hold them, physically stop them. For the more aggressive kids that tend to be more physical in nature, that is really important. And a lot of times we as adults, we want to just sit where we are and boss them around and tell them what to do from the couch. And they actually, especially certain ages, really need that get up and move and do something about it. Teaching children appropriate expressions of feelings. So of course we want to model the appropriate way to communicate feelings, to express them. It's okay to say that you're feeling a certain way. If they're calling names or something like that, we can help to model, hey, it sounds like you're feeling angry. Can you tell me why you're feeling angry? And then try to have a conversation about that. Also modeling appropriate behavior. So, well, and just to go back to 5, appropriate expression of feelings. Yes, we want to model how to communicate about feelings, but we also want to give them outlets that are appropriate. So if you have a child that continues to need a physical outlet for their feelings, then give them a certain pillow that they can punch, or a punching bag, right? Sometimes there needs to be a physical outlet of to express the feelings, not just the verbal. It takes a long time to get to the point where you can verbally express your feelings. Some adults never get there. And so the expectation that we would think children would just calmly talk to us about how they feel is not accurate. And so sometimes they actually need a physical way to let go of some of those feelings. Okay, modeling appropriate behavior. So this goes back to us, almost always it goes back to us, but if we're punching holes in the wall, our children are gonna punch holes in the wall. If we're being snarky and sassy and rude to our kids, even if they don't do it back to you because you have kind of the power, they're gonna do it to other people. So we have to model how we want them to speak to us. We have to model how we express anger and feelings in general, talk through some of those feelings and try to model appropriate behavior that way. And meeting their needs. Sometimes children's behavior is just a product of being too tired or too hungry, or being in a situation that has gone on too long. Like I think of the hospital where I work, and we see toddlers come in for, I don't know, let's say they've got like a cut on their head that needs stitches, but that didn't happen till right before bed. And so now they're past their bedtime. They're having to sit still in a waiting room. Then they're having to sit still on a gurney. Then we expect them to hold still for a procedure. I mean, it's just that kind of environment is not appropriate. And a lot of times parents get very frustrated with their kids, also because the parent is stressed in that situation. But I mean, it's not reasonable to expect a toddler, overtired toddler that's hurt and scared and having all these feelings, be cooperative and compliant. But then they get in trouble, or the parent gets angry at them for not being cooperative and compliant. It's just really unreasonable. So making sure we're meeting their needs. If they're tired, put them to bed or make them take a nap. If they're hungry, feed them. Really it's often some of those physiological needs that they have that they just need help controlling, and that comes back to us. The last thing I want to think about here is a question that your textbook actually presented, which is, when faced with misbehavior, are you interested in changing the behavior, or are you more interested in winning or controlling or making the child suffer? And that's a hard question to ask yourself as an adult, because there are many times where I can say for myself, sometimes I'm like, I just want to teach them a lesson, right? And that is really not how, if that's our mindset, then we're going to be more prone towards the discipline side, which doesn't lead to self-regulation, instead of the guidance side, which does lead to self-regulation. And your book has lots of suggestions about how to do this. I'm going to just briefly tell you them, because I want you to make sure you spend some time looking at these. They're in between pages 180 and 182. Okay, so general guidelines for guiding young children. I think that those are really important. Also, on page 182, it says discussing preventative measures with parents. And we talked about that already with the previous slide. And then on 185, guidance as responding to unacceptable behavior. And so that includes giving feedback, allowing children to experience consequences. We talked a little bit about that. Also, using timeout appropriately. rewarding desired behaviors and ignoring misbehavior that's just designed to attract attention, teaching pro-social behavior and meeting needs. Those are really important that I think you should focus on in your book. But I also want to just present another option. I think a lot of times, sometimes some of this conflict also comes from the fact that, and this maybe is more thinking in terms of a parent-child relationship, but also I think it happens in kind of a caregiver-child role as well. But there are times when we, I think as parents anyway, will think that we're kind of producing our mini selves with our kids. And so we expect them to act like us. And the reality is that they have their own unique personalities. They have their own interests, their own level of emotions, their own personality. So just to give you an example from my own life, here is it's my husband with my youngest daughter and also my son. My son has a very different personality than me. That picture sums it up. He is climbing on things, he is being funny, and he is physical, like in everything he does. It's, if he comes in for a hug, he comes in hard, and it's a lot sometimes. These next pictures are something that I walked into one day. I was in the bedroom or some other room of the house, and walked back into our living room and found this. He had taped himself and his sister up completely, like bound them as hostages. I don't even remember what they were playing, but I was shocked nonetheless when I walked back in on this. So this is just to give you a snapshot of his personality. My personality is like, let's sit down with a good book and a cup of tea or coffee. Let's play a quiet game together. And what is tricky is that doesn't always match up, right? There are things that he wants to do. This is a boy that also has so much creativity. It's just like oozing out of him. He wants to make things out of things that I can't even figure out how you would ever make that. Like he made a super soaker water blaster out of recyclables. I mean, it didn't exactly work, but he has those ideas, and he wants us sometimes to help join in that creativity, and it's just exhausting. And he probably feels like he's always being told no or not now. He definitely hears like, I don't have the energy for that. And I feel like a lot of times misbehavior can really just be a difference in personality, that one parent has a certain type of personality and the kid has a different personality, and they just don't always line up. And I think that we have to be careful as parents, because we don't ever want to make our children feel like they're not who they should be, right? Because the things that I love most about my son and appreciate the most about him are his creativity, are his playfulness, is his ingenuity to create things and to think of, Lego designs that he makes, that I look at that and think that could like actually be a thing that they make with instructions and sell. It's really impressive. I can't do that. I don't have that ability. So I would never want him to make him feel as though he's not good enough just because it doesn't match with my personality. But also the things I love about him most are the things that are the most draining to me, that I don't always feel like I can support well as his parent. And so a lot of times I think misbehavior comes from that imbalance, and it's our job as the parent and as the adult to really not just try to be something that we're not, but to let our children know that we value that about them. So I will have frequently had the conversation with him that the things that I find most wonderful about him are his creativity and are the ways that he's different than me. But there has to be a balance too. I can't just give to him to the point where then I'm not self-regulated, right? So we have to find that balance. But I just think that sometimes as adults, we need to look at, is this really just a difference in our personalities? And how can we kind of meet them sometimes? So recently for his birthday, we had an epic water balloon battle. I'm not kidding you, like 800 and some water balloons were thrown at this battle. And his grandparents got involved, and we just were like slamming each other, all completely drenched. And that is like the kind of play that he just craves so bad and he wants all the time. We can't give that to him all the time. It's just not in us. That's why he needs other little boys to play with. But that birthday, oh my gosh, he still talks about it. He says now he wants an epic water balloon battle at every birthday he has. He wants it to be a tradition. And so there's ways that we can find where we come and we match our kids in spurts. But when we can't match it, we can tell them, hey, what you're doing is amazing. I'm just not able to join you in it right now. And I think that can give ourselves permission as adults to say that to kids, but not get angry at them for having more energy than we do. So really finding that balance together. Okay, I hope that gave you some things to think about. I apologize for how loud it was for a while because my kids are in the background playing, but they're appropriately being children, so I'm gonna be okay with it. All right, you guys, any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and I will see you soon within the realm of class.